Good morning and welcome to Forward Focus for the week of June 11th. We're going to start out today by taking a look at the overall market. I'm going to pull up the S&P 500 here first. And over the last couple of weeks, we've seen this break out to new highs over the quarter. So we've had two primary corrections so far. And usually when you're in a trading channel like this, we often see moves where you'll get waves of 1 and 2 back and forth within the range. And then when you go for a third wave, oftentimes that's really tending to press a previous move, and you'll usually see it struggle a little bit more. This is what happens most often when you're dealing with something that is in a range. It's not as common when you got more of a straight uptrend where you can get 3 waves a lot easier. The two-wave scenario tends to happen more when you've got the back and forth within more of a trading range. So right now what we dealt with is the S&P 500 only came up about halfway from the previous drop early in the year. So this zone of resistance is really that 50% level, kind of that midway point. And usually when you get the two waves back and forth, if you get a two-wave move where the momentum shifts, that can actually lead to a larger breakdown, which is what I was considering when we were heading into the summer. If this had slowed and we'd seen more of a shift in momentum at the highs here, that would more easily lead to a much stronger pullback, a stronger collapse. At this point, we are at resistance again. We're dealing with these previous highs. You can see the momentum is slowing a bit here on the daily time frame compared to the previous upside moves. And when we go and look at the intraday action, we're even starting to see another shift in momentum here at highs, with a potential momentum reversal on like the 30-minute time frame, two-wave correction, little two-wave move to highs, shift in momentum here. And this follows a pretty strong upside move over the last week to 2 weeks, where going into this high, I talked about this in League of Traders a bit, going into these highs, it's a lot harder for the market to mount a really strong and consistent pullback. A lot of times you're more likely to get ranges opening up where you'll see a lot more back and forth action, or if they do start to turn around, pivot, hold a high, they'll often start more gradually before they can manage to pull back more strongly. So right now what we're seeing is the channel widening up at highs. This opens the door for things like 2Ts, where you get slightly higher highs and reversals, as well as momentum reversals, where you go for a third high. That's kind of where I'm leading as we go into the new week, just because we have these Vs at the highs here on the S&P 500. So that does make it more likely that we could even get a third high here for a momentum reversal. I'll show you guys what that momentum reversal pattern looks like here. So here's what a momentum reversal looks like. And you can see we are right about here right now on the current formation with the overall market. So we're starting to see that channel shifting. We've already got an initial low, an attempt here at the second high. So this is what we're looking at this point. Now, a 2T is a little bit different. A 2T looks like this. And more often you'll get a shift in momentum going into that second high to that second slightly higher high. And we really don't have that happening right now in the overall market. We just have it coming up for a retest with this V formation. So looking at support levels, basically you're going to be looking for ideally a parallelogram. So this favors a pullback into the early part of the week off of this resistance. If we look at the Russell 2000, you can see that this paused at that 100% expansion, exactly the level we were looking at a couple of weeks ago. And now we've seen a two of continuation here. 1, 2, up to 138.2. And this overall move is again starting to shift momentum. We go to the 180 and we have the 120, and we actually have an avalanche beginning to form here where the momentum has continued to shift into these highs. And now we're getting a potential for an avalanche breakdown on the 120. So this is the pattern that we're looking at heading into the week. Overall, my bias is going to be on the downside, just looking for corrective actions intraday, keeping in mind that the daily momentum is still really strong, so that can make things choppier as we start to turn around. So here's the Nasdaq. And you can see the Nasdaq was the strongest. It came into the previous high here. We've got a slightly higher high to serve as a trap, but the momentum is still very strong. Even though it shifted a little bit at this highs, there's still room to retest the high or start out more gradually before you get any stronger pullback or stronger correction. So basically looking for more intraday back and forth, but focus is still going to be on downside action, corrective action this week, coming off of this resistance zone. I'll show you guys the tick charts here. Because what you're going to see is that there is a nice two-wave move off of the lows, and then momentum is starting to shift again. Now here's the channel. And this channel is going to be the major support that we need to see break before this can offer a stronger pullback, stronger correction. So right now it's looking like, we have the possibility it might try to go for a third, but it still is favoring more of a downside bias. So that goes along with what we're seeing on the Russell, with what we're seeing on the S&P 500 as well. The Dow has been lagging with the overall market. It's kind of trying to round off here at lows. It doesn't have the extension quite yet with the impulse move, even though the momentum is about the same. But I suspect that it's going to follow suit as the rest of the market tries to correct. It just has the potential to kind of dampen things a little bit. So I like to see a consensus amongst all of the indices, ideally, but oftentimes you'll see patterns that will be stronger in a couple of the indices compared to another. So the Dow here is trying to form a 2T on the smaller time frames, and it's really at a do or die zone. It's had the two waves up. It's starting to turn around. Usually coming off of a 2T, this will turn around pretty quickly. And so just like what we saw with the Russell with the avalanche, those are going to be setups that are going to need to trigger pretty early on in the morning on Monday in order to get that decent follow through that we need to see on them. Daily time frames, even though we're dealing with resistance levels, because the momentum is still pretty strong, there is still wiggle room here. So even if this pulls back and triggers that setup that we are following, there's still going to be room for retest of highs. And that goes along with what we were seeing on the Nasdaq as well. So at these levels, just the fact that they pull up so quickly into the previous highs allows for a little bit of wiggle room at the highs. So you can see momentum shifting a lot of times. You can see things like larger avalanches, and sometimes they will just start with a more gradual correction. And you'll see a lot of back and forth action. You'll get nice intraday setups, but it could take a little while before you get a bigger pullback or a bigger impulse move on the downside. Now let's go take a look at some of the currency pairs here. Start with the euro dollar. So the euro dollar, we've been watching for quite a while. When it first started to come into this zone of support here, back in May, really the end of April, starting into the beginning of May, we started to see a bit of a shift in momentum, but it had a pretty decent continuation, two-wave continuation, kind of the midway zone here, slowed. So here's that two-wave move. And now we've gotten a two-wave bounce. So once again, we are at resistance here on the smaller time frames. This might wiggle around a little bit here, but ultimately I'm looking for another pullback here on the intraday charts. Here's the 200 tick, but let's actually back out just a little bit further. So here's the 500. Here's our two-wave move up. Channel's breaking. So I'm looking for continued downside in here, basically bring it back to the lower end of where this channel broke. So this is going to be the next zone of support here on the euro dollar. Really looking around 1.174, 1.175 zone within the next, I would say within the next 2 days, if not today. And because of this daily time frame, again, the momentum really, really strong on the downside. So here's an example of how sometimes things can start out slowly. When you get strong momentum, they can start out slowly and then gain momentum to correct. So even though it might have a more gradual correction to start with, it's not necessarily going to be a continuation type of move. You have to watch what happens with the momentum within the range here. So we're dealing with that same zone, same type of zone of support here. So I am expecting more back and forth action, some of these bigger swings like we saw back in here at the start of the year at these levels. And for this to try to continue higher really well, basically you'd be looking for like a phoenix, but at this point, because it's a V bottom, a phoenix could just do a two-wave and still pull back. And overall, this would tend to create a much slower uptrend than the downside move. Our Aussie dollar is another one that's been striking support recently. It's had a two-wave into support, kind of shifted momentum. Shows you how reactions off of these levels can begin where you get a really strong movement to the downside. You're still getting upside, but the overall upside continues to slow. So that leaves open the possibility that ranges can widen up. You get a lot more back and forth action. The overall upside can struggle. So even if this tries to gain momentum later on, a lot of times you'll see a lot more action like this before it does so. Overall, the support level is really good on some of the larger time frames. Show you guys the weekly here. So it's a really nice, solid level of support, but there is also plenty of room for this to still try to break down again on this weekly time frame. And given the weak action we're seeing off of that support level, at some point, that is a very good possibility here. When we look at the 500 tick, we are dealing with a bit of a pennant type of momentum reversal. It's not like the strongest of momentum reversals because you don't have a full parallelogram. It's kind of a little bit shy. You don't have the full V's. It's basically a little bit of a variation between the 2T here in a momentum reversal. So kind of off to a slow start, but definitely room that this can pull lower. Looks a lot like the euro dollar. Dollar yen here is also at resistance on some of the intraday time frames. You can see we've got a little bit of kind of a double top type of avalanche here as we head into the day. On the daily time frame, we're really mid-range and we've got momentum going decently both ways. So this is going to be pretty much up in the air as to how this can play out, and it's really going to come down to what the smaller time frames do. This could easily bounce back again here on the daily time frame before we see another pullback, another correction. So it's basically one wave up. There's room for another wave up, but at the same time, if we don't get that shift in momentum, it could still do like a little 2T, pull back down and form more of an avalanche, kind of pulling this back up. I'm leaning more towards the 2 wave here. And let me pull up the intraday charts here. Actually, look at the 120 here. So here we've got momentum reversal. We've got the 2 waves coming out of it. Here's kind of going to be the lower end of this parallelogram. So this has room to go and do that second wave here on the 120-minute time frame. That's where I'm leaning towards. But as you can see, this isn't the most solid midway type of range thing that you will usually see between 2 waves. It's not a nice little, head and shoulders, inverse head and shoulders, or 2-wave correction. Yeah, you got those 2 waves in there, but you've also got this momentum reversal that led into it. So that can make things a little bit trickier, but you certainly will see this enough times in here that that doesn't rule out the potential for this, just because it came back so fast off of this low as opposed to forming a bigger avalanche off of that support. So that puts this zone over here at highs and basically looking for like a double top, 2T type of potential there on the larger time frames now. US Canadian dollars really sloppy on the daily time frame, not much of a surprise, but it looks a lot like the dollar yen on the intraday time frames, how it had the momentum shift, the pullback, and then is getting ready to try to pull up. So it's a really good example of how that can play out on the dollar yen. I'll show you guys that here again. Just kind of undo this. So you can see that comparison where we're basically looking at, here's the momentum shift like here, here's the pullback like here, here's the bounce like here. So this has room then that can go and put in that second wave just like it did on the loonie here on the daily time frame. Euro Aussie also at a good support level. Intraday some resistance, daily support. So this can do again that playing out back and forth in here at the support. Euro pound is trying to turn around with a bit of a phoenix, but it's a weak phoenix because this channel here is still pretty weak on the upside. So we're trying to get a little bit of a 2-wave movement here coming off of this channel break. It's going to run into resistance here at the upper end of this channel, assuming it can even manage to gain that momentum. On the weekly, it's pretty much up in the air. It doesn't have a major bias here because it does have the 2T, but it was a 2T that hit with pretty strong, decent momentum. And when it came off the 2T, it didn't go immediately into a really strong avalanche. It had an avalanche, but it was a really shallow one. So it pulled back sharply, had the avalanche, but the avalanche channel was just like this. So this could easily go either way at this point, and there's not like an incredibly highly predictable level right here. Intraday charts are pretty much up in the air too. We've got, extension here coming into the week just with average intraday impulse moves, but nothing too serious, just kind of still favoring range bound type of activity, really. Aussie, and this gives you an example of when you get the strong momentum move into support level, the type of action that you can see at those support levels. So you do get a lot of back and forth action where it's really nice to play two-wave moves. And that's really where a lot of these currency pairs are at right now. Dollar Swiss is coming into some support here on the daily. Held the resistance that we were looking at several weeks ago and has really been a slower, more gradual pullback. Again, because the momentum is so strong, you get a lot of times more of that overlap back and forth. And it can pause and then go and gain momentum, or it can go into a longer trading range. Really have to watch how this happens here. So over here, for example, it paused and then that allowed it to shift the momentum so that it could gain momentum. So it began more gradually, had a little bit of a pause where it broke this immediate channel, and then was able to gain momentum. So really it comes down to how does it pause out of here? Does it bounce back pretty quickly? In which case there's more likely it's going to go into longer trading channel, or does it do like this, where the momentum starts to change and falls into more of an avalanche instead? And that would allow for another sharp breakdown. The weekly is kind of favoring more of a retest of the highs, just because we've already got the two-wave channel move here with the parallelogram, so it's kind of favoring it could bounce a little bit stronger, but it's not a huge bias because this could just as easily pull back again here in a little bit. So I'm not going to get locked into one way or the other on this. Just going to come down to how does it react off of the support level. If it's overall a slower reaction, even if it starts out quickly, if it turns around like we saw on here, where you can see it started out a little bit quickly, but then it shifted, that's enough to get it to turn around. And that's not at all unusual that it can do that right there. All right, let's look at some individual stocks here. We got Apple. Of course, everyone wants to check out Apple. So Apple tried to do a continuation here about a week ago. But of course, this is a really high level base and a very small correction in time compared to this impulse move. So you can see this impulse move here. It had a little bit of that smaller correction, but it allowed it to turn around and kind of go into a longer correction. So this impulse move, this is really the type of correction that we're looking for in terms of the time development. So this is really still pretty early on compared to the impulse move in May and the one back in February, and even here and here. This is a pretty small correction so far. So when it tried to get going, it struggled with that fact. And this can put it into more of a channel here at the highs, more back and forth action like that. Really needing to focus upon what's happening on the intraday charts. Intraday chart here, you can see the weakness that was coming in with the momentum reversal, and now it even has room for another pullback into this channel here before it would try another bounce. Overall, a lot of weakness starting to hit here on the daily time frame that's going to begin to show its head on the weekly as well. Here's another example just intraday. This is just a 100 tick, showing you how really strong moves can start out with some decent bounces and then it shifts the momentum, and that allows for the stronger correction. Whereas if you don't get that shift in momentum, it can go into more of a trading range that can pop it back again. So these are the two ways that you'll see, things kind of playing out. And a lot of times it comes down to what happens on the smaller time frame. So in this case, we got the 2T double top, the two-wave move back up into the highs, and that helped change that momentum to bring it down. So this on the weekly is just still playing out at the upper levels of this channel. So I wouldn't consider this to have broken out of this channel yet. If it totally clears this, it could put in another wave on the upside. We got to keep in mind, though, that Apple has already had 3 major waves on the monthly chart here. And it's really just playing with the upper end of this channel here. So this is kind of a pretty important level for this security. And that's why we're having so much trouble trying to break free of it. And there would have to be some really solid news or something to allow this to offer up a really strong breakout of this. If it does manage to break, we'd be looking at this level here as the next target zone. So if it breaks, it actually has quite a ways that it could go, but first it needs to deal with this channel here. And this channel is slowing and it is weakening. Netflix is another that's been showing weakness. It's had a two-wave move to previous highs. Tried to do a 2T, kind of shifting momentum a little bit more at this high. The monthly is one where we have that extreme move. So again, expecting that even with strong waves back and forth, even if we get a strong wave of downside intraday on the daily time frame, even on the weekly time frame, it can still bounce back up or just have a harder time getting going. So here it's trying to form a 2T on a weekly. So pulling back into this, it can get a strong start, but the overall trend would tend to be slower before you would get any sort of stronger downside coming out of that. So I am looking for this as further downside here in the weeks ahead, just as corrective mode, but really focusing upon looking for patterns on the intraday timeframes to give us those opportunities. So here's a little bit trying to do a little bit of an avalanche here intraday, but this is still not going to be a really strong move because it's going to run into support here. So this might take another swing, like another little 2T or something intraday before it really gets stronger selling coming in. A lot of the gold shares are still looking like they're trying to weaken here. You can see again, really strong movement off highs. Congestion is starting to gain momentum. There is that room for another wave of selling to come in here on the daily time frame. You can see it's congesting here along the lows. Bonds are also up in the air a bit more because they had that sell-off that we followed going into the beginning of the year, struck support at previous lows, but didn't offer a really quick continuation. So that means that this is more likely to try to shift momentum, even if it tries another breakdown, that it will be a more gradual move. And we'd get more of a parallelogram type of move as opposed to really strong continuation. So for this to have offered a stronger continuation, we would have wanted to have seen more of a 1, 2, 3 with a kneecap, and that would have offered this as a head and shoulders and this as a measured move here. So the slightly lower low here is kind of taken a little bit of wind out of the sail, and the fact that we've now got a longer base here, which we didn't have on the initial drop, that means that even if this breaks down, your overall channel here is going to be slower. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap this up here for today and get this posted so you guys can all take a look at this. If you have any questions, shoot me over a message at info@tradingfrommainstreet.com, or you can hit me up in Mentor Monday or our live training sessions on Tuesday and Thursday in League of Traders. You can join League of Traders by going to www.tonyhansen.com/join. You can also go to tonyhansen.com on the main page and click on Community and join our League of Traders there as well.